Hi, I'm Robbie Bobby. This video is the 13th in a series that examines the laundry list, otherwise known as the 14 traits of an adult child. The topic is trait 13, which reads, Alcoholism is a family disease. We became para-alcoholics and took on the characteristics of that disease, even though we did not pick up the drink. This trait includes two independent yet interconnected statements. We'll begin by looking at the first. Alcoholism is a family disease. This axiom could stand on its own, but if it did, it wouldn't be saying anything new, at least not to members of AA and Al-Anon who have known this for decades. The basic meaning is this. An alcoholic, and by extension, alcoholism, affect more than just the alcoholic. That's because the disease spreads out, as it were, to affect every member of the family. The spouse, the children, even the parents are affected by the alcoholic's behavior, by their emotional neglect, self-centeredness, unpredictability, often their rage and violence. The list goes on. However, it's the child of the alcoholic who sustains the most profound and deep-rooted effects, which can last a lifetime, often disguised as, that's just the way I am, as opposed to, this is how I was affected by growing up in an alcoholic and dysfunctional home. The former is a hopeless situation. The latter opens the door to recovery. The Al-Anon program, which preceded ACA by roughly 30 years, is based on this premise that alcoholism is a family disease, which manifests as codependency in the family members and often mimics the behaviors of the alcoholic. Al-Anons often say they become as sick as the alcoholic, and that they took on the isms of alcoholism. However, this concept was first introduced in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The following is an excerpt from page 122 of the 4th edition, and I quote, "A doctor said to us, years of living with an alcoholic is almost sure to make any wife or child neurotic. The entire family is, to some extent, ill," end quote. This was first published in 1939, that the child of an alcoholic would become neurotic. The wife, in my opinion, was likely already neurotic, which is why she married an alcoholic. To learn more about that, watch my video titled, What is Codependency? The child, however, truly was a victim of both parents. In other words, the child was affected by the alcoholic parent, as well as the codependent parent. They didn't understand this in 1939, so they put the full blame on the alcoholic. They did, however, understand what it meant to be a neurotic. The following description is from WebMD, and I quote, "Neurotic means you're affected by neurosis, a word that's been in use since the 1700s to describe mental, emotional, or physical reactions that are drastic and irrational. At its root, a neurotic behavior is an automatic, unconscious effort to manage deep anxiety." End quote. Some of the hallmarks include worry, fear, anger, shame, guilt, depression, and loneliness. And these negative emotions dramatically increase the risk for substance abuse, including alcoholism, which is what created the neurosis in the first place. They are, in fact, part of a vicious circle, which is multi-generational. And this sets the stage for the second part of the trait. We became para-alcoholics and took on the characteristics of that disease, even though we did not pick up the drink. This introduced the word para-alcoholic and its counterpart, para-alcoholism, to ACA's vocabulary. It says we took on the characteristics, although it doesn't define them. However, trait 13 can only be interpreted within the context of the full laundry list. These characteristics, you see, are the 14 traits: isolating, approval-seeking, confusing love and pity, fear of abandonment, and so on. These are the characteristics we developed when we were children due to our parents' alcoholism, codependency, or other forms of dysfunction. If you have these traits and grew up in a dysfunctional home, then you qualify as para-alcoholic, regardless of your current or past relationship with alcohol. I know ACAs who believed this trait did not apply to them because they did pick up the drink. The reality is, picking up the drink in an alcoholic way does not invalidate the trait. Instead, it confirms it. Bill W. said that drinking was but a symptom of the disease of alcoholism. However, it's one of many other symptoms of para-alcoholisms, which is the foundation for both alcoholism and codependency. To learn more about this, watch my video on trait 4. We either become alcoholics, marry them, or both. Since para-alcoholism is broader and runs deeper than alcoholism, I think it's more accurate to assign para-alcoholism as a family disease. I think this would fit in better with the other traits and be less confusing. Here's my alternate version of trait 13. Para-alcoholism is a family disease. We took on the characteristics of that disease whether or not we pick up the drink. I believe the phrase alcoholism is a family disease makes the most sense in the Al-Anon program. This is because the word codependent, short for co-chemically dependent, which replaced the word co-alcoholic, implied a relationship of mutual destruction due to the negative symbiotic relationship that exists between the alcoholic and codependent. The alcoholic has a negative effect on the codependent, and the codependent has a negative effect on the alcoholic. Together, they spiral down. All the while, the innocent para-alcoholic child becomes collateral damage. However, there was a word that preceded co-alcoholic, and that was para-alcoholic. That's right. In the 1940s, which was pre-Al-Anon, family members who met for mutual support, typically the wives of alcoholics, often referred to themselves as para-alcoholics. The prefix para has two meanings. One, next to or close proximity with, which these women most certainly were, both at home and during their meetings, which were typically in the next room. And two, closely resembling, which was also true. Remember that Al-Anon say they take on the isms of alcoholism. The only limitation is that it implied a one-way effect, as it were, that the alcoholic affected the para-alcoholic. However, the definition is more appropriate for ACA, where the child is clearly the victim of both parents and not a perpetrator in any way, shape, or form. By the way, the definition of para-alcoholism offered in the Big Red Book of ACA states, para-alcoholism is the chronic fear and distorted thinking of our family transferred to us. I believe this hits the nail right on the head. And the solution to this entire mess is to love yourself. And that wraps up this video, which was meant to be food for thought. If you got something out of it, please click like and subscribe and forward to a fellow traveler. I'm Robbie Bobby. Thank you for listening. And as always, keep coming back.